oriented here. Thank you very much, Marcia, and for having me here at the UIC. Oh, good, okay. Okay, so it always takes me a little while to get going. I am going to show you projects that I've been working on for the past 10 years or so. How's this sound? Can you all hear me? Okay. And I'll start just by explaining as much for myself as for all of you what the threat has been over the last 10 years in the work. And I sort of view these speaking opportunities as a chance to kind of, in hindsight, look at the connections between the work. Actually, it is, oh no. I think it's the mute button. Okay, thank you. So, as of today, the way that I'm stringing the work together, well, first of all, it really has connected the various disciplines that I've studied for my education, which are architecture, computer science, and information design. So broadly, I would say the interest is in the structure of experience. And conveniently, as a designer, I think the work focuses more on, or my interests focus more on the how than the what. And I say conveniently because as a designer, of commercial work, you really have to sort of react to what comes your way, and which could be an interesting discussion following this. I know, as both a design and an art school, you have choices that you can make after you leave. But anyway, I am a designer. I solve problems. But I usually sort of find the structure. I usually find the problem or the solution through the structure of the problem. So the focus is on the structure of experience. This interest really started through architecture, and in architecture, I still think that there are the most powerful experiences to be had. Personally, this is a view of the Pantheon in Rome, and I'm sure for those of you who had been there, or even just the photos, you understand what I'm talking about. And the interest, again, is how do you identify an experience like this? How do you describe it? How do you capture it? How do you represent it? And ultimately, how do you create something like this? And not only, through architecture, but how do you create a powerful experience in a website, which I think is incredibly challenging. So I think probably the best representation of the power of the experience of the Pantheon is through this Noli plan, which is a 18th century drawing of Rome, representation of Rome. I've always loved plans as kind of information representations because there's a whole space that you can occupy. And in this case, you can see what's interesting about this plan is that it really was a commentary on public space. So interior spaces as well as exterior spaces are represented as these kind of openings or voids, and the private spaces are blacked out. And you really get a sense, I think, this plan really describes, for me, the power of the experience of Rome, this kind of older fabric of Rome, where you kind of go down these sort of long, shaded pathways that draw you into these wonderful piazzas that are scaled almost like exterior rooms. And again, the Pantheon and the piazza right next to it is one of my most favorite. But my most favorite piazza in Rome is this one, San Ignazio. And you can see that these buildings kind of work together to form these smaller scale spaces. And it's really, again, sort of captures what is so amazing about that experience. So I look at this as, again, it's sort of information representation that creates an experience unto itself. And of course, this is a view of looking out of the Pantheon to the piazza, and you can see how the scale of that space, the height of the buildings, it really does feel like an exterior enclosed room. So another interest I had in architecture, I was sort of obsessed with this idea of how do you create a space that can be many things at once. The Pantheon, when you go into it, you have that sense of awe, you look up, you sort of sense, you feel diminished in this sort of larger space, which I think is kind of the existential point of the space. But what if you lived in the Pantheon? How would you create a space that would accommodate the need to not always be, thinking about your existence or, a place to eat and to sleep? And so the idea of an adaptive space became of great interest, something that was responsive to your needs. And when you create experiences, it's really, to create that kind of engagement, I think it's important to understand that we're not always sort of predisposed to have some kind of awe-inspiring experience. And this led to an interest in proportion, and there are certain proportions like the golden section where you have that kind of perfect ambiguity of something. If this rectangle was shaped like a room, you have a room that has this sort of perfect, static, balanced quality, but because it's slightly rectangular, it also can be a space that can move. And then when you put spaces of this proportion together, you can create that sort of, again, flexible type of space that adapts to some kind of static activity as well as a dynamic activity. Okay, so now somehow I thread this into my interest in computer science, which was kind of happening at the same time as I was focused on architecture. And it seems like there's the power, for those of you who, I think so many of you younger people do this now, but for those of you who write some kind of code or scripting, there is that pleasure, that magic, that power of creating an artifact that creates multiple end artifacts or multiple experiences that adapts to changing information, changing inputs, that has some response to participation. So in some ways, programming provided the solution I was kind of looking for in architecture, of creating some type of adaptive experience. And I put this up because, color's not so great there, but I actually had a little stint after architecture school. I really was planning to become an architect, and then various things happened, and including a bad economy, and was interested also, have always been interested in making a living as well, but and I took a job. Motorola was hiring architects to do layout design for memory chips. And this kind of led me back into programming and to the idea of encoding design rules. The work became very repetitive. So I started with a couple of people in my department to basically write rules for laying out the metal lines, basically, in these chips. And that's what ultimately led to the Media Lab. So the other piece of this is working with information. And this is one example, sorry, it looks awfully yellow, but I guess I won't worry about that. Anyway, this is one of the projects I did while at Quokka Sports, which was a startup software company, or production company rather, for sports experiences. I'm not really a sports fan, but there was something powerful about the data. And while at that time in, I guess it was the late 90s, there was this kind of holy grail of, broadband video, and my team was working on what can we do with data. And this was one of my favorite little projects, which was a race viewer, and there was a dynamic version of it, which I'm not really planning to show today, but basically, for me, this is like the Noli plan. It's capturing 2 hours of a motorsports race, and basically over the x-axis you see the 83 or so laps of this road race. This race looks like it was not very interesting because Brian Herta, you can see, starts out in first position and finishes first. And these lines represent the positions of the drivers over the course of the race. So you can see that Tony Kanaan is sort of giving Brian Herta a run for his money until lap 42, and he drops out of the race with transmission problems. I don't know if you can see that. And then you can see after, I really, like I said, I'm not a sportsman, but I became fascinated by the power of this one static representation. There was a moving version as well, but this one kind of captures the drama of that whole race. So here you can see, after a while I got to learn that, this is when there were usually pit stops. You got to get another tank of gas. So there are a lot of lead changes here, and then, there's some mess over here, probably another pit stop. But, and you can see, for example, the drama of this blue line. There's one driver who was really accelerating through the course of this race. And again, the sort of depth and the ability of this view to capture the drama of that race was something that we devoted a lot of time to and effort to at Quokka Sports. So another example that I've actually been using as greeting cards for close acquaintances, friends, are these receipts. And the kind of abstraction, the power of, sort of less is more. So the power of this kind of information to encode a really intense emotional experience, again, is of great interest. So this receipt is dated September 17th, 2001. It was the cab ride back from LaGuardia Airport to New York after I was in London on September 11th. And again, all these are sort of these intense moments of our lives are just there are these snapshots in receipts that have such precision in time and such an abstract sort of visual representation. And lastly, this is something that I've been trying to put together in recent projects, which is the kind of power of information in physical space. So I almost wish that this were in such a powerful space. This is Grand Central Terminal in 1963, and which in its own right is kind of like a pantheon space. But even if it were a bad space, there's something intense going on here, which is that in 63, CBS News put up this video screen to broadcast John Glenn's orbit through space. And this space, which is usually a high-traffic circulation space, became a theater at that moment of time. So when there's a kind of scale of an event that large, you can really transform a space and create not only an intense experience, but a shared powerful experience. Okay. Oh, whoops. Actually, that shouldn't happen. Okay, now I'm going to show you some work, and hopefully this will be brought together. Starting from the Media Lab, this work was, well, it's hard to see. When I first started at the Media Lab, my experience was in architecture, so designing 3D was much more familiar to me. And I started working with information for the first time, and I was interested in creating a space of information that was somehow embodied. This is probably the darkest thing to see here, but and that represented something abstract like financial data. And in this case, this is 7 mutual funds from Morningstar. And it kind of started out as news data. I was, again, interested in the structure of the experience and trying to map the almost embodied qualities of the space, the fact that you can occupy it, with with something that could be understood about the information. So this blue plane represents each plane, as you scroll back and forth, represents a particular mutual fund. And then there are categories on top, like yield and portfolio statistics, annual returns, and you can take a slice through each one of those, and if you rotate it 90 degrees, you can view, you can get this view of that data on all 7 funds. So then I can move this back and forth and get sector weightings, yield and portfolio statistics, and annual returns, for example. Sorry, the controls for this are really cryptic, so I'm in trouble. And then if you take a slice in the vertical dimension, you can learn things like annual returns over 10 years. And let's see. And then you can compare that to other bits of data. Well, it looks like there's very little red on this display, so you're not seeing the bars. Anyway, so that was actually the first project at the Media Lab. My thesis project was this project, which became sort of the origin of a software company that I also won't talk about too much today. But this was a project that attempted to visualize events, artifacts, works of art, science, philosophy that happened kind of at the turn of the century. And here again, there was this mapping of an experience in time and space, and this basically constructed virtual space. There were, again, sort of people and events, artifacts, and they were all sort of tagged with different categories. In this case, and the categories were represented by threads which connected things. So in this case, we see Wittgenstein at the intersection of 2 threads, architecture and philosophy. And each point, each green dot, again, representing one of these, we call them information objects, had a particular geographic location and time, representing 3 dimensions in a space. We also had these other types of objects representing categories. In this case, this thread represents everything related to the history of flight in the database. And we created these kind of automatic curated tours through this space, so that the camera, sort of the 3D camera, would take you from one event to another, and they would open up and reveal themselves to you. And then the space started to become somewhat architectural, and there was an idea of traveling through these layers of time. There's a little video, this one, these projects are 10 years old. They were running on the sort of highest end 3D graphics machines we had at the time, and I recently ported the financial project to this laptop. So this one will probably be next. So from there, actually the one thing that was not mentioned on my on my bio was this studio that I started called Information Art, which I still feel an allegiance to, and in some ways I really prefer that term to information architecture. And the first kind of physical work of information art was a collaboration with my sister, who's a playwright and director in New York. New York has many small theaters, so there are many playwrights and directors, and performers. But she basically put this piece together, which is in itself a piece of information art. It was actually more of a docu-comedy, and it was called Snatches. And it was based on the recorded transcripts of Monica Lewinsky and Linda Tripp. And every word in this comedy essentially was taken verbatim from the transcripts, which it turned out were primarily about hair and weight, and also about Monica trying to get a job after losing her sort of internship. And my part, there's no red in this projector. Sorry, because the set is pink. I'm almost tempted to adjust this, but okay, I won't bother. So my role was to create a set for this show, and I worked with my sister on sort of the setting of it. And we had, because all the text was time coded, we used this scrim and projected the time. We tried to be as accurate as possible. And the show was kind of divided into these sections, below, which was about hair, and job, which was about finding a job. And we also projected these headlines that had these kind of double meanings to them. Anyway, the other thing that we did is we staged it so the actors were never seen frontally. This was kind of to convey the virtuality of a space, because all these conversations took place on the phone. So there was Monica's space and Linda's space, and there was kind of this overhead view of the bed and of the living room, and then a sideways view. So that was kind of the first foray. Actually, well, that was happening simultaneously with this first real foray into physical space, which was a bit literal in a way, but taking information to physical space. This was a project for Penn Station, actually the redevelopment of Penn Station in what's now the Farley Post Office building. This project, after 5 years, I'm happy to say, is finally starting again. And we're working with the developer this time, rather than the architect. I guess that's the way it works, unfortunately, to get things done in New York and probably a lot of other cities. So I loved the original Skidmore, Owings, and Merrill design, which is shown here in section, but apparently that's all changing now. All real estate development in New York comes down to money. It is truly the most transparent kind of interaction. So even our design, somehow we sort of find ourselves being persuasive on financial terms. Anyway, it's an education. So the project was to develop a program and a design for this media wall, which was already outlined in the drawings as this orange line. And there were different needs to serve for different people at different locations in the station. The big architectural move was this, what's been referred to as the chip. And unfortunately, that's lost in the new design. So it's a huge board, basically an LED board that's 200 feet long by 40 feet high. And I just started finally doing the disclaimer before I talk about this. This is a project that there are parts of it that I feel very attached to and parts that I would completely do over. But, and the beauty, of course, of this kind of display is that it can change multiple times a second, so I guess that could be possible. Anyway, this was a prototype, and again, in sort of true transparent money mode, it was intended, as I learned while I was doing it, to offer a kind of a carrot to the developers by the Penn Station Redevelopment Authority and the architects, SOM. So they were trying to get developers interested in the project because apparently $500 million of federal money is not enough to build this station. So this was created as showing that there's a revenue opportunity here in this media wall, along with retail. These are things, by the way, that I had no interest in school. I kind of have little interest now, but the politics are, and the sort of power brokering, when you get inside at this level, is kind of fascinating. You can't help but be fascinated by it. So basically, the board, sorry, there's way too much green there, but I guess you'll bear with me. anyway, these are two elevations of the wall. I'll show you a movie of it in a moment. But the only required information is here, which is the train information for 3 transit lines, Amtrak, New Jersey Transit, and Long Island Railroad. And then there's the current time up here. And then it's basically structured like a fold-out printed train schedule where you can see all the trains that are due to arrive in the next few hours. And then there's a lot of other program, again, in the spirit of New York development. There's a lot of advertising that would support and run this board. And I'll show you a video of it. It basically was intended to provide, a program was developed to provide particular cited information for people traveling and waiting in different locations. I'll show you the movie. The part of it that I'm most attracted to was actually this part, which is not showing up very well here, but it was this pattern that was developed for actual train schedule information. And I had to fight to keep that in because it had apparently no monetary value. But I was interested in the idea, again, of a sort of flexible display. When you need that train information, it's there. But can you create a sort of surface, a pattern that would have some ambient and maybe even decorative qualities when you don't need it? And for me, if this thing could become like its own sort of version of wallpaper, and I mean, I think this is the project that I really would like to do, some kind of pattern, which again is sort of informational, adapts information when you need it, but sort of disappears and becomes like part of the environment when you don't. So this is fast forwarded just to show you what's going on. Again, there's sort of advertising. Oh, the way I saved the part that was interesting to me was to layer advertising behind it. So this shows the current time. Again, it highlights trains that are due to arrive, and at different intervals, the board slides to the right and shows time passed. And in this case, we're showing the Dow Jones over the last few hours. The idea was to keep the travelers' time in context of world events. And you can see sponsorship. There were sponsored 15-minute time slots. Again, they're sort of necessary evil of this thing. And larger headlines that were intended for people sort of way back in the concourse space. So again, a lot of program, a lot of our displays, our sort of approach is a lot quieter now, and kind of more motivated by this end view, which is an idea about offering some kind of art program. Okay, so that led to another project, another transit-related project. I actually really love transit projects because there's some kind of critical information usually, and they're often, significant and grand spaces. This path terminal is now being built, was designed by Santiago Calatrava. We did a first study with the Port Authority in 2004. I worked with another partner at Pentagram, Michael Garricky, on this. And let's see. The Port Authority project was purely a functional project, and our role was to design some kind of media proposal that would be basically, again, for budget purposes, so they could apply for the grant for federal money. But we were encouraged to take a lot of liberties with it, and there was a need for this thing to feel like, as they put it, like a 21st century train station, and whatever that means. And for, okay, I'm going to go back one. In 2004, what that meant was media walls, because people kind of understood, oh, we need a media wall to feel sort of like a 21st century space. And there's typically not a sense of what the program would be. And so that's something that we've had the pleasure of bringing to the project. And I'll also assure you that we at times often really do recommend not having a program or sort of pulling back on some of the media in these projects. But because we knew this was a prototype, we kind of went all out, and I'll show you what it looks like. And then I will show you a couple built projects too. So in this case, the idea was to put all the information that the traveler needs, I say lightly, in one kind of digital soup. And so that would include transit information, weather, traffic information, news, stock information, market information, and then of course there was merchandising and advertising, wayfinding information as well. So what we decided to do, instead of a media wall, we decided to break the media into these strips that could accommodate the long concourses and run throughout the space. So we created this idea of a media stream. And there's also an assumption in all these projects that the content is separate from the display. So the content is like a system that has a life of its own, and you can, no matter where the display goes, you can sort of plug into this media stream, this sort of content system, and display it. So here are just some still shots showing some segments of this media stream, which we imagine to be about 18 inches high. And it was designed kind of like, oh, there's no red there. See, the 1.9, that's a red line. There you are. So the information has a direction. Everything is sort of flowing in a direction that's reserved for its meaning. So if the 1.9 are to the left, those things will move to the left. This is the Dow Jones. It will move up if the market is up, and down if it's down, and so on. And then merchandising information is all kind of contextualized by things like weather and news. And there was a kind of grammar about where these things would go, how they would move on this display. And that's the time in New York. This thing runs a little bit slowly, and it's kind of out of scale. But again, you can see, well, I'll wait till some wayfinding information comes. The thing that I thought was most interesting about the project was the idea of moving wayfinding information that could basically walk with you as a pedestrian, and then, again, it's a little out of scale here, but, and then it might sort of take off. It would have a kind of animate quality. And so the motion of this information is something else that really has a lot of power to communicate. Sorry, this animation is clunky. But. For another moment. It also could, there are all sorts of possibilities of it responding to the occupation of the station. And again, this is one example of a display, but there could be other forms of it. We always like to get some kind of civic content in there. Okay, and then there were some notions of how this thing could be threaded through the space. It could just be straight, it could be by these moving sidewalks, or it could bend and move. But each part of the display would be addressable, would be site-specific, and would be part of this system. And then there was an idea of vertical towers. This one was of particular interest to me. Again, colors are really hot. But these 5 vertical totems represent different sectors of the Dow Jones, for example. So imagine if you're kind of in this immersive moving bar chart that's updated multiple times a second, getting a sense of where the market is going. And then this was another idea that this is a project I've always wanted to do, which is to make treat government almost like a sports event in a good sense. So this was an idea of basically streaming legislation as it's happening. So when Congress is in season, so to speak, bills would be sort of streaming on these charts. You could see how your senator or congressperson voted. And the idea of putting this stuff in that kind of information in a public transit space and the kind of activity it would generate is something that I've always wanted to do. This was the idea of this media landscape. And again, the space was sort of an abstract shell, but this is kind of what we were proposing. Note the C-SPAN. I think I was working on this during the election, the 2004 election, which spurned a lot of interesting projects. Okay, how are we doing on time? So I'm going to talk about one web project and then show you a built project and kind of wrap it up soon. So the web projects, it took me a while to kind of get excited about doing web projects. We've done a number of them. I'm only going to show one today, which is not a great design, and that's what interests me. It's not a great visual design. I mean, it's fine. But what was interesting to me was designing at the level of infrastructure and the level of rules for a website. And MIT has a very loyal and sort of quirky, eccentric community. And they already had a great website, which looked very amateurish, but it changed every day. And basically, we decided that we had to keep the change. We couldn't change the change. And we basically just facilitated it and supported it. And our goal was really to integrate this new identity, this new logo that was designed by someone else. And so what we did is we created this simple kit, in effect. We created a shell. They wanted something that looked a little bit cleaner than their existing site. And we created, and then their basic navigation, everything had to be straight HTML. And we put together this kit that they could use to get contributions from the community, which is what they were doing already. But again, we sort of helped facilitate it. And the website, that's red, the website changes every day. And this was the first day that it launched, April 1st. And there's basically a changing piece of art or photograph in the site that has some contributor and then an associated spotlight. And these are screenshots from the first few months of the launch, but I still go and check in on it, and it's exciting to have created sort of the rules for something, the structure for something, but to see it constantly changing. And some of the designs are really wonderful, and some of them are really awful, and I actually love that fact. It really depends on who's contributing. This is red also. We also created, the inside pages are kind of slices of the logo, and they also change color every day. We created these scripts that allow them to change the background and the text colors, and the palette is completely flexible. Oops, okay. Now finally a built project. And I'll sort of get into this and explain how it relates. For Bloomberg, Bloomberg as you probably know, is this, it's a media company. It's a financial information and media company, and with offices around the world. And Pentagram was asked to do signage and media installations for their offices on 59th and Lexington, a new building. And I worked with another Pentagram partner, Paula Scher, on this. So we started, Paula actually has a way of explaining all of Pentagram's work as being about identity. And I think I've grown more and more to understand that. In fact, what we did in this project is we made information into identity. So it started with, we looked at the existing logotype of Bloomberg, which is based on this 50s typeface, avant-garde, designed by Herbert Bayer. And we observed in their current spaces, they basically had big Bloomberg signs to mark that you're here at Bloomberg's headquarters. And then, of course, they had information, a lot of financial information, particularly numbers running through the space, using tickers, their Bloomberg terminal. And this slide sort of represents the schism that we saw between their identity, their visual identity, and what they create, what they're about. So we did this very simple thing at the very beginning of the project that really held through. So we created a typographic, specifically a numerical identity that was based on the logotype. And we kind of created these avant-garde numbers with this quirky 0 relating to the logo. In the middle of the project, they actually changed the logotype to another typeface, which freaked us out at some point. But it was still related, and anyway, that's another story. But so the idea, again, for these media installations, they wanted installations that were dynamic, that could change, and it made perfect sense to run information on them, and specifically Bloomberg information. So we looked at what the Bloomberg news that Bloomberg provides, which is not only financial news, but headline news, sports news, market news, obviously. And we observed that most of these stories created by Bloomberg had numbers associated with them, and this is also a big part of the Bloomberg culture. So the idea was really simple, was to parse out the numbers and have them carry the identity of Bloomberg. So the first proposals, the project really changed a bit, but this core idea held on. And the first idea was so this is a rendering of a building before it was built, obviously. It's a Pele building, and we had this idea of streaming these large numbers, kind of projecting them on the exterior, looking at exterior installations. This is a sort of light projection, so we thought it would be acceptable, but it turns out that it violated some city code, and Bloomberg, as the mayor, didn't want to have any special exceptions made, so that was out. And then this was a first concept sketch about streaming these numbers and news through the space. And now I'll show you what was built. There is, on the exterior, some Bloomberg identity. The signage, which we are also doing, uses these big numbers, big resin numbers to represent floors. There's a lot of red here, but you can't see that. These are not quite the final shots. They have a big part of their culture are these pantries where visitors and employees can grab food any time of day or night. And here's an example of one of the directories. Even the back of house signage, even on the stairways, use huge numbers. Paula, in particular, loves those numbers. Wow, you can't even. That's a red display. So the other part of this was this big media, sort of these media strips in their main space. everyone is taken up to the 6th floor where there are a lot of fish tanks and pantries and this large display. This is supposed to be green, representing the NASDAQ. That's bright orange. Okay, you can see black and white. So it's basically leading with these large sliced up numbers and following with headlines. That is bright red. Okay. Yeah. This is also like bright pink. Anyway, so here's a video showing, giving you a sense of how it works in the space. So again, we reserve the direction of the information for particular meanings, like when the market is up, the information moves up. There are clocks that relate to their various offices throughout the world. Again, sort of headlines. This is a sports headline. And all of this is running now automatically. There's some video that gets picked up as it relates to weather around the world. And that's a nice big red. And they're also, that's red as well. There are, now I know what it's like to be colorblind. So there are also, one of the bands runs around the side of this space on the pantries. And there's a kind of, as you saw from the video, there's a sort of particular choreography and sort of frictionless movement of these numbers. And it also has the effect of really coloring the space. That's red. It's a kind of green. Okay, you can see blue pretty well. And this is taken from the courtyard outside space. Okay, I'll show you, how much time do we have? I guess we're kind of, I'll just show you, I'll do another 3 minutes if that's okay. Another project we did, kind of a softer project, was for the New York Botanical Garden in the Bronx. This is an identity that Paula Scher's team worked on. And my team was asked to create some kind of a sort of display that would address people as they came to the garden, to tell them what to see, what was in bloom. And let's see, actually, go to the next one. And what we did, that's really hard to see as well. What we did is we so much of what we do is about citing the information. So we found a perfect opportunity on these windows above the ticketing desks in the visitor center. And those are pink cherry blossoms. And we created a kind of tool and a video library for our clients so that they can change this presentation once a week as they continue to do. And as you see, this is Greek, but and the video, they basically pick up these video clips that we shot in the garden depending on what's in bloom, what to see. And then again, the text is very simple, and it tells them some of the highlights. I'll show one more little video. It runs slowly, sort of intentionally, because it's a garden. Here's some shots of this space. These aren't showing up all that well. And those are bright, brilliant, kind of red and white roses. Okay. All right, and then, all right, I'll finish on this one, which is just a fun project that we did at Pentagram called the Photo Booth Project. And again, this is the kind of stuff that still keeps my interest, which is creating an environment that creates an experience that is completely sort of unexpected. In this case, we created this photo booth where people could take their own photos, really simple worked with a photographer who created some very flattering lighting and projected it on the third floor of Pentagram. This was for a party. And basically, it was somewhat magical. As people came upstairs, they could see their photos displayed in this party space. Very simple technology, but again, had that element of surprise and unexpectedness. And of course, everyone can connect with photographs of themselves. So with that little playful experience, I will conclude, and I'm available for any questions. Thank you. Okay. Oh, yeah. Oh, for my hair. Okay, sorry.